Number one, the church is a missionary society. That's false. Number C, the church is a benevolent society, and that's false. Number two, the church can do what the individual can do. Number three, the believer can provide a home, and the church can provide a home. Number four, the answer is home. Provide the place, necessities, personnel, and orphans. Not just poor saints' orphans, but orphans. Number five, the board of directors stand in place of the parents or guardians, as set out in Galatians 4, verses 1 and 2. Now I'd like to look at the questions that I gave him. Does James 1:27 apply to the church? He said no, not collectively. Well, the word church is used in three senses. Number one is the congregational sense. Number two is the universal sense. And number three is the church in assembly. So he says it does not apply collectively. I told you that that would be his position, and it is his position. He says this is not pertinent to the discussion tonight. It is pertinent to the discussion tonight. Number two, can the church function as a home? It says it depends on what you mean by a home. By a home we mean a unit of society. We mean the inmates of a house, all persons forming a family, a household, from the Greek word oikos or from the Greek word idios, one's home, household, people, members of a family. It's a unit of society, a household which is formed by a family relationship, such relationship being either natural or legally restored. Number three, does Galatians 6:10 apply to the church? He said no. But yet in Ephesians 5:19, he says that applies to the church. Ephesians 5:19 says, speaking to yourselves in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. Notice the pronouns. And we have plural pronouns also in Galatians 6:10. Humon in Ephesians 5:19 is plural, and it's plural. We have a plural in Galatians 6:10, us. Why wouldn't it apply to the church? It does. You know, Galatians 6:6, we can understand applies to the church. That's the scripture for paying the preacher. We can understand that Galatians 6:6 proves that we can pay the preacher out of the church treasury. But yet when it comes to Galatians 6:10, a lot of people do not believe that means we can help poor people and orphans and widows out of the church treasury. But it does. Do you believe the church could buy fertilizer for the preacher's yard but could not take a dime out of the treasury for a non-saint orphan? His answer was that I believe, that Brother Merideth believes that the church could take money out of the treasury for fertilizer, and indeed I do. The difference is, I believe it could take it out for the fertilizer, and I believe the church could take it out to buy milk and to help those who are orphans. Orphans! He denies the latter, and that's the difference between us in this discussion tonight. Do you believe 2 John 9 applies to the church? I was having a hard time following that. I understood that it applied to the individual, and I thought you finally said that in some way it applied to the church, so I hope that you'll help me out on that. I'm not sure that I understood really what your conclusion was on that. I'd like now to go back to chart number 1, the basic argument again. Here is the basic argument that we presented to you earlier tonight. This does deal with the issue, my friends. Number 1, if it is the case that the needs of orphan children must be adequately met, and they must be adequately met. Number 2, the care of orphan children is not an individual responsibility exclusively, and we'll argue that more at length in just a few moments. An orphan child's needs cannot be adequately met without his having or being a part of a home. In order to take care of a child, and in order for the child's needs to be met, that child needs to be in a home. God setteth the solitary in families. They need to be in families. They need to be in homes. Number 4, the church without any further organization cannot function as a home. A church and a home are two different things. The church can provide the means, and the home actually administers those. Number 5, the Bible does not specify the kind of home that must be used to meet the needs of orphan children. It may be a foster home, legal home, or natural home. That is in the matter of expediency. James 1:27, 1 Timothy 5:16, Galatians 6:10, points out our duty, our obligation, what we are to do. We are to do it. And the Lord has left it in a realm of expediency as to whether it be a foster home, legal home, or a natural home. And homes structured like Childhaven are homes or benevolent institutions which may meet legal requirements. Now, if you're going to take care of children, you get more than 6, the law is going to require that you be classified as a child care agency, which means you're going to have to be incorporated, you're going to have a board of directors, you're going to have a license. You're going to have to meet the legal requirements to take care of those children. And that's what the orphan home does. It meets the legal requirements. A church may contribute from its treasury to a home for orphans. And we'll be arguing that again more at length in a few moments. So it is indeed in harmony with the Scriptures for churches of Christ to build and maintain benevolent organizations such as Boles Home, Childhaven, and Homes for the Aged. So we have seen that these things do have a bearing on the proposition that we are discussing tonight. Brother Sutton refers to Noah and the ark. Noah was indeed commanded to build an ark of gopher wood. God specified that it would be gopher wood, but he said, "Rooms shalt thou make in the ark." That was the realm of expediency. Tennessee Orphan Home meets the legal requirements. It has a board. It's interesting to note that in the Brentnell Woods debate on page 52, Brentnell endorsed the Tipton Orphan Home that was under elders. There's nothing wrong with organization. There's nothing wrong with a license. There's nothing wrong with being chartered. His objection was that he wanted it under elders. That one was. He does not go along with some other matters, but the organization of it, he says that he does endorse. That particular home is set up under elders. However, I'll remind you that under the law, that when they oversee that home, they are going to be acting as directors of that home. So says the Department of Human Services. He is objecting, he says, to the institution type of Tennessee Orphan Home, going to a family type. In the care of orphan children, there are various methods that are developed over the years. Sometimes they build large buildings and put a lot of children in them. They sometimes refer to these as, quote, institutional type buildings. At other times, they build cottage homes and they place the children there. As you look at these, either arrangement is proper and either one is correct. And from time to time, people follow one procedure and at other times they follow another. He pointed out about cognitive changing. And indeed, I pointed out that the brethren who believe that generally have changed. The mention of men like Brother Roy Cogdell, an outstanding preacher among them, and Homer Haley, who was an outstanding writer among them, and he's still alive, and Fanning Gator Tant, in times past, all endorsed and went along with orphan homes. But they changed along the line and decided to try to destroy the orphan homes. And that's what all this discussion is about. I'd like now to look at the principle of love. This is chart number 2. Friends, I want you to consider carefully this argument. I believe it's a very fine argument. The church is to love the brethren, and is to love all men. 1 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 12. Love means helping those who are in need. And love means helping more than simply those who are your brethren. We are to love as God loved. God sends the rain and the sunshine on the just and the unjust. We're to love like God does. The church ought to love like God does, which means we're willing to help not only our brethren, but we're willing to help those who are not our brethren. We're willing to help orphans and widows and those who are in need. So thus the church should help more than just those who are poor saints. Notice again what Jesus did when he was here upon the earth. Jesus healed the daughter of the Syrophoenician woman. Notice the Syrophoenician. It wasn't just poor saints. And he says that's not the issue. It is the issue. It's very much a part of the issue. One of the basic differences between us is that I believe that the church can help orphans, whether they're saints or non-saints. he believes the church can help orphans that are saints only. That's the only ones that it can help. Jesus healed a servant of a centurion. He was willing to heal those who were Gentiles. Jesus fed the 5,000. He fed the women, and he also fed the children. Certainly the church ought to be willing to feed men and women and children who may be hungry. Brother Sutton's position, as we pointed out, actually makes fleshly Israel superior to spiritual Israel. Why, under the Old Testament, on the law of Moses, Deuteronomy 14, 28, and 29, they could give the tithes to the Levites, the strangers, the fatherless, and the widows. They did that under the Old Testament. Now here we come to the New Testament, and out of the church treasury, he says that you cannot have an orphan child who's not a member of the church. He talks about boards, license, institutions, friends. When you go beyond all of that, he doesn't believe you can help anyone unless he's a poor saint. An orphan child that's not a poor saint would not qualify for help from the church by this man's position. I'd like now to look again at a principle. We'll simply read this. All passages which relate to peculiarly religious matters are passages which apply with equal force both to the church and to the individual. And now we're ready for chart number 12. Now his position is that James 1:27 applies only to the individual. But now here's his problem. If it is the case that to visit the fatherless and the widows in James 1:27 refers exclusively to the individual, then here's his problem. 1 Timothy 5:16 says that the church is to help widows. If a man or woman have widows, let them relieve them, that the church be not charged. But now if the man and woman that believeth will not take care of them, the church would be charged, and the church would be responsible for taking care of them. How would they take care of them? In a home. That's what the individual would have them in, a home. That's what they would have. If the church took care of them, it would be a home. And the church is to help those who are widows indeed. But since 1 Timothy 5:16 shows that the church is to take care of widows, notice the church to take care of widows, it follows then that James 1:27 could not be exclusively individual. If you did, you'd have James in conflict with Paul in Timothy. Martin Luther had that problem. He read Paul and then he read James. He decided to take Paul, and what was he going to do with James? He banished it to the index of the Bible back in the back. That's the way he got rid of it. I'd like to consider with you now number 13, chart number 13. Notice the visit is from episkeptomai. It applies with equal force to the fatherless and the widows. But if it's exclusively individual for one, then it would be for the other. It is not exclusively individual for the widow, so therefore it cannot be exclusively individual for the orphan either. Let's look at chart number 14. Brother Sutton says that the church may pray for wisdom. Does he get it from James 1? Or does he get it from some other passage? James says, if a man lack wisdom, let him ask of God. If a man, let him ask of wisdom. He admitted that the church could pray for wisdom. And this is a passage that states that if any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, where we pray for wisdom. He admitted that the church could pray for wisdom. The church can pray for wisdom. The individual can pray for wisdom, and the church can pray for wisdom. Can the church be a doer of the word? The individual can be a doer of the word. Shouldn't the church be a doer of the word? Certainly so. May a church practice pure and undefiled religion? Certainly so. If not, the church could not even practice pure religion. It makes me cringe to hear brethren say that the church cannot practice pure and undefiled religion. May a church keep itself unspotted from the world? A church certainly may keep itself unspotted from the world. I'd like again to notice the difference between the missionary society and an orphan home. He talks about buying services from a missionary society if it preached the gospel. Missionary society doesn't preach the gospel, be inconsistent. A missionary society couldn't preach the gospel in its purity and simplicity because it's a missionary society. How could it ever preach the gospel? Now, the difference between a missionary society and a home is this. A missionary society is an ecclesiasticism. A home is a home. A missionary society replaces nothing that God established which has been lost. In the case of an orphan home, it replaces a home that was lost. The missionary society robs the church of its autonomy. An orphan home does not do that, not any more than a private home does. A missionary society is not scriptural, has no scriptural right to exist. The home has a right to exist, both a legal home and a natural home. 1 Timothy 5:16 shows that the church has a right to provide a home for that widow, and for those when they're not taken care of, and a home for widows indeed when they don't have anybody to take care of them. Number 5, the missionary society should not receive funds, not even from an individual Christian. An individual doesn't have a right to give to it. Whereas an individual may give to an orphan home, surely he would admit that the individual can give to the orphan home. That shows that the missionary society and the orphan home are not parallel. And a missionary society is an association of churches, whereas an orphan home is an association of children. You know, sometimes it gets to be harder to take care of children than what a lot of people think. There are a lot of things that are involved in taking care of children. Let me call your attention to an article in the Gospel Guardian, September the 19th, 1957, in an editorial. Let the fact be clear, the purpose of this article is to seek to find a home for all 4 children where they can be kept in a unit and grow to maturity as a family. There are several faithful Christian couples in the home congregation who are eager to take 1 or 2 of the children, but it is desirable, if possible, to keep the family together. At least the elders are going to make an effort to find some Christian family able to take the entire group. If they fail in that, they will put the children in different homes right in their own congregation, thus allowing them to grow up knowing and associating with one another, even if they cannot be in the same family. If you cannot, therefore, take all 4 children, do not write. You know, sometimes it's hard to take. If you have 4 children in the same family, and they're orphans, and you're trying to get somebody to take care of them, how would a bachelor take 4 kids in? He couldn't. How could a 16-year-old young man who's become a Christian take 4 kids in? He couldn't. Everyone is equally related to James 1:27. Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction. It applies equally to everyone, to bachelors, to widows, to married people, 16-year-olds who are members of the church. It applies to everyone. How could a 16-year-old do it? Well, he couldn't do it himself, but he could put money in the treasury and help to see that they were taken care of. A bachelor couldn't take 4 himself at one time. The bachelor himself would have trouble even getting them. He couldn't. But he could put money in the treasury, and that money could then be used to take care of those children. Here were 4 children that needed a place to go. It's hard to take 4 at one shot. And so they might have to split them up. They were trying to work on it to find them a home, which simply shows that it's difficult sometimes for children to be placed in private homes. And when you look at taking care of children, you've got to consider the legal matters. As we have pointed out several times, if you get in most states up to around 6 or 7 children, you're going to have to be classified as a child care agency. You're going to have to get a license. You're going to have to be incorporated. You're going to have a board of directors. You're going to have to meet legal requirements. And if you don't, somebody's liable to wind up in jail over the matter. Now in 2 Corinthians 9:13, we have the proof that we can help not only those who are saints, but those who are non-saints. Paul is thankful for their liberal distribution or contribution unto them, there's the saints, and unto all men. As Pontus, all men. Similar construction in Acts 5:11, 1 Thessalonians 3:12, 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 15. Take, for example, 1 Thessalonians 3:12. They were to abound in love one toward another and toward all men. As Pontus, the construction there again, all men. Not just poor orphan saints. but all orphans. Thank you.